Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, help me stand. I am tired, I am weak, and I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
I wish to say finally, as I've said many times before, that this is not a war with Islam. It angers me, as it angers the vast majority of Muslims, to hear bin Laden and his associates described as Islamic terrorists. They are terrorists, pure and simple. Islam is a peaceful and tolerant religion, and the acts of these people are wholly contrary to the teachings of the Quran.
I also want to speak tonight directly to Muslims throughout the world. We respect your faith. It's practiced freely by many millions of Americans, and by millions more in countries that America counts as friends. Its teachings are good and peaceful, and those who commit evil in the name of Allah blaspheme the name of Allah. The terrorists...
I want you to understand, I want the world to understand that our actions today were not aimed against Islam. The faith of hundreds of millions of good, peace-loving people all around the world, including the United States. No religion condones the murder of innocent men, women, and children. But our actions were aimed at fanatics and killers who wrap murder in the cloak of righteousness, and in so doing, profane the great religion in whose name they claim to act.
My name is Ken Bigley from Liverpool and Bolton district. I'm here in Iraq, and I think this is possibly my last chance to speak to somebody who will listen from you. I need you to be compassionate, as you've always said you were, and help me. I don't want to die.
حتى نراك طليقة مرتاحة وسنبقى نذبح الكفرة حتى نراك عدت إلى أمك وأبيك أو زوجك وبنيك والله أكبر والعزة لله. الله أكبر.
The tendency of Western political leaders to deny the connection between Orthodox Islamic mainstream and terrorist violence is replicated in the universities and the media. Wherever you look, both in Western Europe and in North America, the members of the elite class have this tendency to proclaim Islam, some mysterious, authentic Islam, to be peaceful and to be tolerant, and those Muslims prone to violence are proclaimed to be non-representative fringe. Well, I would really appreciate if people who make such claims could then explain the continuity of violence from the earliest day of Islam, from the earliest days of the Prophet and his immediate successors throughout the 13 centuries of recorded history.
the real burning question in the world today is, does Islam and Islamic civilization actually sanction the violence that we're seeing being perpetrated in its name around the world? And to that we have to answer, if we're going to be honest about it, an unqualified yes. The Islamic sources, the Islamic texts, starting with the Quran, but not limited to the Quran, the Islamic texts including the hadith, Islamic tradition, Islamic theology, Islamic law, the traditions of the interpretation of the Quran throughout history and Islamic history itself all bear witness to the fact that Islam has a developed doctrine, theology, and law that mandates violence against unbelievers.
The origins are, of course, in the Muslim desire to impose all over the world the only religion, the only just religion, which is Islam, and the suppression of all other religions in order to establish the rule of Allah over the whole earth. This is a religious duty which binds the whole community, and which the Muslim community is obliged to impose, because they are obliged to obey the order of Allah, and this is the desire of Allah as expressed in the Quranic revelation.
I believe that those terrorists that want to do harm to others are applying the true Islam that was practiced by Muhammad and his followers in the early stage of Islam.
In Islamic theology, the Prophet Muhammad is considered al-insan al-kamil, which is the perfect man. He is the model par excellence to be imitated. He is the person that the more a Muslim is like him, the better off he is. So the Prophet Muhammad is revered today in the Islamic world as the primary model of human behavior.
Well, when Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, wiped out all the Jews from Saudi Arabia, there was 3 tribes, Banu Nadir, Banu Qurayda, Banu Qaynuqa. We were proudly studying this in school as Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, ordered the beheading of the Jews of Banu Qurayda and the women being taken as concubines. As soon as a child had pubic hair, he was beheaded. So the Jewish population was either extradited or beheaded. The story of Rabbi Qanina is a well-known documented story in Islam. Rabbi Qanina was tortured by the order of the Prophet of Islam himself. His eyes were put out. He was burned in order to confess where the Jewish tribes were hiding their goods, their gold and their silver and all those kind of things. And this is right from the hadith. This inspired us as Palestinians, inspired us on fighting jihad against the Jews in Palestine.
Authoritative Islamic History, The Life of Muhammad, Sirat Rasulullah, by Muhammad bin Ishaq, edited by Abdul Malik bin Hisham, translated by Professor Alfred Guillaume. Then the Qurayza tribe surrendered, and the apostle confined them in Medina. Then the apostle went out to the market of Medina and dug trenches in it. Then he sent for them and struck off their heads in those trenches as they were brought out to him in batches. There were 600 or 700 in all, though some put the figure as high as 800 or 900.
Another example that may be even more chilling of the deleterious influence that Muhammad's example has upon the Islamic world was exemplified recently by an Egyptian leader of a radical Muslim party who wrote just recently that he couldn't believe that the beheadings in Iraq were being protested by Muslims. Weren't they aware that the Prophet Muhammad himself beheaded between 600 and 900 men personally, members of the Jewish Qurayza tribe in Arabia, after he had defeated them? Didn't they realize that if the Prophet did it, then this was the proper way to behave? And so the Mujahideen in Iraq, who are beheading people, are simply obeying the example of the Prophet. Now we can see then that since the Prophet Muhammad himself participated in many battles and raids, and did indeed perpetrate these beheadings, he ordered the assassination of several of his political opponents, and he behaved in general like a typical 7th century warlord. The problem is that when this is transferred to 21st century behavior, 21st century contexts of behavior, then what you get are terrorists. The Quran occupies a place that has no parallel in Western civilization. The Quran is considered by Muslims and by traditional Islamic theology to be dictated word for word by God himself, by Allah himself, through the angel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad. As a result, every word of it is the words of God himself. Every word of the Quran, unless it is canceled by another section of the Quran itself, is valid for all time and cannot be questioned, cannot be reformed, cannot be changed within an Islamic context. This means that moderate Muslims, peaceful Muslims, if they are sincere, have to reject entirely Quranic literalism. But to do so puts them outside the sphere of anything that has been considered Orthodox Islam throughout history, because to do so is to reject the very basic premise of Islam, that this is a book that is dictated by God and is a perfect copy of a perfect book, the al-Kitab, the mother of the book that has existed forever with Allah in heaven.
The Noble Quran, translated with parenthetical notes by Dr. Muhammad Taqi-ud-Din al-Hilali and Dr. Muhammad Muhsin Khan. Surah 98, verse 6. Verily, those who disbelieve in the religion of Islam, the Quran and Prophet Muhammad, from among the people of the Scripture, Jews and Christians, and al-Mushrikun, other disbelievers, will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of creatures.
So the Quran is simply a set of direct commandments or else narratives, descriptions, sometimes very distorted descriptions of Judaism and Christianity. Because of the normative nature of those commandments, the second important body for Islamic jurisprudence and for Islamic polity is the tradition of the Prophet, the hadith.
Now, the hadith are absolutely necessary to make any sense of the Quran, because Allah addresses Muhammad in the Quran and they talk about incidents in Muhammad's life, but they don't fill in the narrative details. So you have to go to the hadith, the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, in order to understand what's being said in the Quran and why. The hadith are many, many volumes of traditions of the Prophet. Various Muslim scholars, beginning in the 8th century, which is some considerable time after the life of the Prophet Muhammad, who died in 632, they started to collect these traditions and to try, through various means, to winnow out the authentic ones from the inauthentic. From an Islamic standpoint, if something that Muhammad said or did is recorded in one of those books, then it has authority second only to the Quran. And in those books, there is a great deal that illuminates what the Quran says and how it is applicable to Muslims in the present.
Authoritative traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, the Hadiths of Sahih al-Bukhari, Translated with parenthetical notes by Dr. Muhammed Muhsin Khan. Volume 4, Book 52, Hadith number 53. The Prophet said, "Nobody who dies and finds good from Allah in the hereafter would wish to come back to this world even if he were given the whole world and whatever is in it, except the martyr who, on seeing the superiority of martyrdom, would like to come back to the world and get killed again in Allah's cause." The Prophet said, "A single endeavor of fighting in Allah's cause in the afternoon or in the forenoon is better than all the world and whatever is in it."
Since there is no sense of natural morality in Islam, you have to go into either the Quran or the Hadith to find out what is allowed and what is not allowed.
And in those books we have very clear instructions from the Prophet Muhammad that it is the responsibility of Muslims to meet the unbelievers on the battlefield, to invite them either to accept Islam or to accept second-class dhimmi status in the Islamic State. And if they refuse both of those, then to wage war against them.
Fight against those who believe not in Allah, nor in the last day, nor forbid that which has been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger. And fight against those who acknowledge not the religion of truth, Islam, among the people of the Scripture, Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya, the poll tax, with willing submission, and feel themselves subdued.
The Quran is broken down into two sections. One is called Makkiyah, which means what was inspired to Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, in Mecca. And one is called Madaniyah, what was inspired to the Prophet of Islam in Medina or Yathrib. In Mecca, you find much of the peaceful verses. Muhammad used to live with the Jewish community and the Christian community in peace and harmony. So there was many verses in the Quran that even the Muslims used to worship in the direction of prayer towards Jerusalem. They saw many elements of a unity between the Jewish and the Christian and the Muslim faith.
There are indeed some verses in the Quran that could be called peaceful and tolerant. Notably the injunction against compulsion in religion. Those verses almost invariably date back to the beginnings of Muhammad's prophetic career in his native city of Mecca, where he was powerless, where he was only beginning to attract followers.
Only few relatives and friends accepted the religion at that time, and he had many foes. So the revelations of that time were very peaceful.
Well, it all changes with the establishment of Muhammad's theocratic statelet in the city of Medina. He becomes a warlord, he becomes the head of a totalitarian state, he becomes very rich, very powerful, and very intolerant. And then many of these early verses, in fact, get abrogated.
In Surah 2, verse 106 of the Quran, it says, or Allah says, I should say, that if we abrogate, we being Allah, abrogate a verse, then we'll give you one that's better.
Whatever a verse, revelation, do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, we bring a better one or similar to it. Know you not that Allah is able to do all things?
This is the basis, the foundation of the Quranic doctrine of nasikh, which is abrogation. And it is the idea that when there are verses that are contradictory or appear to be contradictory in the Quran, the one that is revealed later chronologically is better, as Allah has promised, and cancels the earlier one.
Now the violence started. Now you had to weigh between peaceful verses and non-peaceful verses. So the edict was that these were made null and void.
It is indeed a very curious concept for a non-Muslim to accept the notion that God may change his mind about a topic and may issue one injunction in AD 614 and then a very different one in AD 627. But this is indeed what has happened in Islam.
It's very important to understand that the Quran is not arranged chronologically. It's arranged simply on the basis of the longest chapter to the shortest.
And so you will find in the book itself some of these more tolerant verses at a later point in the book than the very intolerant ones advocating violence and subjugation of infidels. But that doesn't mean they came into being later on. Quite the contrary. If there is ever a contradiction between two injunctions, the ones that came later on in Medina are the ones that retain their validity, and the early ones from Mecca have been abrogated.
The peaceful verses became mansukha, means made null and void, with verses like the verses of the sword.
Traditional Islamic theology has it that the 9th chapter of the Quran, Surah 9, is the last revealed in the career of the Prophet. And it is the only one that doesn't begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Compassionate, the Merciful. Some have said that that's because there's no compassion or mercy in this particular chapter, and that it is the Quran's last word on jihad, and in particular on how Muslims should behave toward unbelievers. In it is the celebrated verse of the sword.
And what does the verse of the sword say? It's very clear. That when the forbidden months are over, kill the people of the book wherever you find them. Lay siege for them. Lay wait for them. Lay ambush for them. Kill them wherever you find them. In fact, I converted to Christianity. Muhammad clearly stated that in the ends of days, there will be many who defect from the faith. Kill them when you see them, wherever you find them. So, this is the question that the West needs to understand. What part of kill don't they understand?
You said that the President reiterated the message of tolerance and the importance that this is not a campaign against Islam or Arab nations generally. Has it been communicated to the administration from those nations, from that part of the world that you've been talking to recently, that is a highly critical thing for the President to do, not just once, but over and over and over again? So why?
We are a country that judges people not by their religious beliefs or by their color, but by the fact that we're all Americans. So that was the first part of the message. The second part of the message is that we have a lot of friends around the world who are Muslim. We have countries that are long friends of the United States who are of the Islamic faith, and the President wanted to be very clear that this is not a war of, quote, civilizations, that this is not a war against Islam. This is a war against people who in many ways pervert what Islam stands for. Islam stands for peace and stands for nonviolence, and he wanted to make that very, very clear. Yeah, sure.
Islam and Islamic civilization are unique in their stance toward non-believers, and that Islam is the only religion in the world that has a developed doctrine, theology, and law that mandates violence against unbelievers. That there are peaceful Muslims, there are Muslims around the world who are moderate, who live in harmony with their non-Muslim neighbors and have no intention of ever waging war against them in any way. But the fact is that they have a very slim justification for their own peacefulness within the Islamic sources themselves. And they are only at peace with their neighbors insofar as they are either ignorant of what Islam teaches about how Muslims should behave toward unbelievers, or they have explicitly rejected, consciously rejected, those elements of Islam. There are, in short, peaceful and moderate Muslims, but no peaceful and moderate Islam. The idea that Islam is a religion of peace, however, is paradoxically enough held even by the most violent and radical of Muslims. Sayyid Qutb, the Egyptian Muslim theorist, whose writings are revered by radical Muslims today, by terrorists today. He wrote and insisted that Islam is a religion of peace. When you study his writings, it becomes clear that he meant that Islam is dedicated to establishing the hegemony of Islamic law over the world. When that hegemony is established, peace will reign in the world. Therefore, Islam is a religion of peace.
But the problem is the peaceful Muslims don't understand the edicts that comes out of the jurisprudence of Islam. If you look at the interpretation of these verses in Al-Azhar University, in the Islamic Sharia schools in Jerusalem, in Jordan, in Syria, and Damascus, all throughout the Middle East, the jurisprudence of Islam clearly state, emphatically, that the verse of the sword made null and void all the peaceful verses. And what does the verse of the sword say?
Then when the sacred months have passed, then kill the mushrikun, unbelievers, wherever you find them, and capture them and besiege them, and prepare for them each and every ambush. But if they repent and perform as-salat, the Islamic prayers, and give zakat, alms, then leave their way free. Verily, Allah is oft-forgiving, most merciful.
Kill them when you see them, wherever you find them. This is not an allegoric kill. It's a literal kill. It's the killing of Zarqawi, right in front of the camera. It's the lynching that you see in Ramallah. It's the killing of over 1 million Sudanese in Sudan, cutting the hands and the feet from opposite sides. And here's the dilemma. The peaceful verse, even the peaceful verse that is quoted, even by Bush, the verse goes as follows. Whoever kills a life without just cause or for doing mischief in the land, then as he killed the entire earth. You'll find the same verse in the Judeo-biblical tradition. But most Westerners never skip after that verse, which makes very clear, but as those who do mischief in the land, then cut their hands and their feet from opposite sides and crucify them, literally. And that's what you see what happened in Afghanistan. That's what you see what happened in Sudan. A huge amount of crucifixions and killings and beheadings and amputations and public assassinations. They really want to revive Islam as it used to be. This is why they call it Islamic fundamentalism.
The recompense of those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and do mischief in the land is only that they shall be killed or crucified, or their hands and their feet be cut off on the opposite sides, or be exiled from the land. That is their disgrace in this world, and a great torment is theirs in the hereafter. The Prophet cut off the hands and feet of the men belonging to the tribe of Arina, and did not cauterize their bleeding limbs till they died.
There is no assurance of what is known in Christianity as salvation and assurance of being saved and guaranteeing going to heaven. However, there are certain things that can help. So if a Muslim, for instance, died while he was practicing jihad, he is supposed to go to paradise.
In the Islamist thinking, the assurance of your salvation is dying as a martyr. In accordance to the verse in the Quran, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتٌ بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. Do not think that the ones who die in the cause of Allah in jihad are dead, but are living. So this assures salvation.
This is the calculus behind modern suicide bombing. Many people will say, modern Muslim advocates will say, that Islam forbids suicide. And this is plainly dishonest, because all the advocates, all the defenders of suicide bombing in the Islamic world start out by saying this is not suicide. the intention of the person is not to kill himself. The intention of the person is to kill others, and that is sanctioned because it is Islamic jihad. And if in the process they are killed themselves, that's an unavoidable consequence of their actions, and they will be rewarded with the reward of martyrs in paradise.
Quran is quite clear about the heavenly reward for a jihadist who falls fighting in the path of Allah. He will be granted instant access to paradise, and a Muslim paradise is an extremely sensual one. It is full of huris, of black-eyed beauties that will await the martyr, and the gratification that follows is eminently unsuitable for family audience.
The Quran contains no guarantee of paradise except for those who slay and are slain in the cause of Allah.
Verily, Allah has purchased of the believers their lives and their properties, for the price that theirs shall be the paradise. They fight in Allah's cause, so they kill others and are killed. Then rejoice in the bargain which you have concluded. That is the supreme success.
In other words, the guarantee of paradise is for people who are killed while they are killing, to establish the hegemony of Allah, or Islamic law, in the world.
Jihad in Islam can be spiritual or physical. The spiritual jihad is striving to be a better Muslim. But also there is a physical part of jihad that you cannot take it away from Islam.
Jihad in Islam means struggle. That's what the literal meaning of the word, struggle. But what the West doesn't understand is that the hadith, the compilation of the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad of Islam, there's almost about 100 hadiths regarding jihad. And if you look at every single one of them has the sword, war, or a military effort. And in the end of the expedition, jihad expedition, he said, now I resort to the jihad within, the jihad that is within, the self-struggle. And as a matter of fact, I had this dialogue with an Islamist one time. He says, Walid, come on, tell the West that jihad means struggle. I said, yes, it does mean self-struggle. You're right. Jihad does mean self-struggle. But so does Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf means my struggle. In the same fashion, the Islamists look at jihad.
It is a very dangerous element of the Islamic teaching, because this instant gratification through martyrdom is an attractive concept. And by the way, when the so-called martyr operation is carried out by Hamas, what is announced from the minarets of mosques is not the death of so-and-so who carried out the attack, but the wedding of so-and-so to the huris. In other words, they immediately make the implication that far from having to cry over his disappearance, over the end of his physical life, his parents should be happy and celebrate and throw a party because their son is now being not only transported into heaven, but greeted there with these voluptuous beauties.
Shaheed, the word shaheed, means witness. To witness, to testify. To testify there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. And you die as a shaheed for that cause. You're a witness. You're considered a witness, a martyr. And a martyr becomes glorified. Your family will glorify you after you die. To a Muslim fundamentalist living in the Middle East, I had to be initiated. I had to basically either kill my first Jew or destroy my first Zionist infrastructure. I had to prove, beyond shadow of a doubt, that I was worthy. And there are ample amount of students, teenagers, men, who are willing to die as suicide martyrs, willing to put explosives, the martyr application is filled. There are many applicants. There's not enough bombs to fulfill the applicants. And to get on one of those missions, indeed, you must have been chosen. You must have been really good. You must have been violent enough. You must have been going out on every demonstration in the streets of Jerusalem or Bethlehem or our village. You must have shown yourself worthy of a greater operation. So when I explain what I've done and people have seen me in the community and I was worthy, I ended up in prison, I was, of course, recruited. And I remember Mr. Mahmoud al-Mughrabi. He was proud to have planted 15 bombs and killed many Israelis. And he was being bailed out by a Jewish Israeli lawyer. He was back right in the street. So you find your bomb maker and you apply. You say, look, I want to join. I want to do my first martyr operation, planning a bomb or whatever. And you need connection. So I found my connection. I rendezvoused with this guy in Jerusalem, in Shara' Bab al-Wad. And he built this explosive charge with a timer and a loaf of bread. And I had to smuggle it from the Temple Mount under the auspices of Al-Waqf department. Al-Waqf police is the Islamic police appointed by the government to watch over the holy sites. Them knowingly that I had explosive charges smuggled me so I can escape from the checkpoints. And there, I carried my explosive charge from Jerusalem to Bank Laumi Israel in Bethlehem. I was supposed to put the explosive charge at 6 p.m. exactly. I was supposed to have this explosive charge in my hands at 6 p.m. exactly. 5 to 6, I saw some Arab children running around, and I didn't want to kill any Arabs. So I decided to place the explosive charge on the roof. I tossed it on the roof. At 6 p.m. it went off, and there was this big explosion. I looked behind me, I see this thick black smoke coming out of the building. And I started running. That's the moment I first got a glimpse of the reality of killing. I thought people have died. And I remember I didn't sleep for 3 days, constantly worried that I've killed somebody. Even terrorists have a reality check that you kill or you're about to die. You can sense it. This is why in Israel, the nature of finding out a terrorist suicide bomber is to look at their eyes. They'll have these glossy eyes. They're sweating profusely. They're not paying attention because in their mind they're about to go. And you weigh the reality of what now you're going to die. And many times I've been in this situation where I had thought that I was going to get killed, shooting back and forth as we stoned at the Israelis and they shoot back at us and things like that. I was face to face with death. When you think in your mind you're going to die, you struggle between the requirements of your Islamic upbringing and between the reality that you value your life. And at some point, one has to outweigh the other. And for a Muslim fundamentalist, we always chose death. We always chose the suicide. My cousin died on his way to Ben Yehuda Street. And he got killed. He died. I had people, relatives die and fighting the Israelis. And as I look at it now, I think, what a waste. What a waste of life.
Okay, and then we say goodbye and shake hands. Okay?
Are you ready, John?
Okay, running.
I'm running too.
So in other words, you want to change. In other words, who gives you the right to change or to put a government in another country?
It shouldn't be us that puts together the new government. It should be the people of Afghanistan, inside Afghanistan and those that have had to flee from Afghanistan. And I think that's the right way to do it. Now, can I say I've enjoyed very much doing this interview with you, and I think that whatever differences there are between us, it's important we carry on with this dialogue. Maybe one of the problems that arises out of all this is there's been insufficient dialogue between the Arab world and the West, between Islam and between people of other faiths. And I hope that we can establish a proper dialogue, and maybe that would be some good that could emerge out of the terrible events of the 11th of September.